Hey guys, Jean-Marc, the Edit Doctor here to fix this edit. Today we've got a local Boston area filmmaker. That's Eddie Frateschi of Red Mailbox Media. Super solid video guy with great creative instincts and a solid sense for the aesthetic. Stoked to review this one because there's just so much good in this edit. So without further ado, let's just dive right in.
My first job was at dishwasher at Howard Johnson's in Mystic, Connecticut in the summer of '76. Hi, I'm David Stein. I'm the executive chef for Nutray. I'm a lifer in the food service, 40 plus years in the business altogether. I've been doing this a long time. I've been an executive chef now, running kitchens for the last 20 years. Work for Nutray is a great challenge because it's putting all of the different cuisines that I've worked with and all of the craft that I've developed in a healthy way. Everything we do here is from scratch. We're not working out of packages. I think that Nutray is going to be very successful. Since I've been with the company, I've seen almost double growth, and I really look forward to staying with the company and watching it grow.
Okay, I'm going to jump right in here because that really had me drooling and I need to look at all those food shots again. I honestly think Eddie did a really good job from a narrative perspective here because he communicates the humanity of the Nutra brand. And hats off to Eddie here because he kept all the items that he needed to make this feel really touching. As far as beats of the story go, he really sets up this guy's backstory, some like interesting first job information. And then he kind of talks about his name, his qualifications. And then he talks about what excites him and what the challenge is for him as a craftsman in food. And then he really talks about like the uniqueness of Nutra and ultimately like how that can grow. And this piece specifically is really built to get people to go to the Facebook page and check out the rest of the interview. And so it's clear that's the call to action, and this is really more of a teaser. Let's go ahead and jump in. I'll talk a little bit about the story structure here.
My first job was at dishwasher at Howard Johnson's in Mystic, Connecticut in the summer of '76.
So right there, we get this guy's backstory. We get a sense of who he is. We honestly, it seems like he's just a hard worker who's known this life for a long time. And that kind of plunges us into setting up the world here. That's sort of the context for the rest of this.
Hi, I'm David Stein. I'm the executive chef for Nutray. I'm a lifer in the food service, 40 plus years in the business altogether.
So this right here, he introduces his name. We've now introduced the person, who this is. So we now have the I of the story. David, he is executive chef, lifer in the food business, 40 years. And then, what's interesting though is implied in that is that, after doing it for 20 or 40 years, he would need something. He would need something to keep his work interesting. And so implicit in what he's saying, we kind of dive into this world of, okay, like, so why is he with Nutra and why is, what need is that fulfilling in him? And you can hear it in this next section.
I've been doing this a long time. I've been an executive chef now, running kitchens for the last 20 years. Work for Nutray is a great challenge because it's putting all of the different cuisines that I've worked with and all of the craft that I've developed in a healthy way. Everything we
So that right there, really interesting because what he does is he talks about how he's been doing this for so long and he knows what he's talking about. He has that little knowing chuckle. And then we kind of jump to why is he interested in Nutra? The challenge, the craft, the focus, the passion. It allows him to kind of take it to the next level. There's a creative obstacle in a way because I believe Nutra does like sort of meal prep and he needs to take all of this stuff that he knows and put it into that format in a way that's interesting to him. Then he talks a little bit about the value add of the company here.
Everything we do here is from scratch. We're not working out of packages. I think that Nutray is going to...
So right there, he talks about like this unique value add of Nutra, which is awesome, or Nutray, and then ultimately jumps into growth in the future and kind of what he sees. In other words, because he has met his need and enjoys this, he can see that his life is changed for it, and he is going to see growth in general out of it. And so you'll see here.
Going to be very successful. Since I've been with the company, I've seen almost double growth, and I really look forward to staying with the company and watching it grow.
Yeah. So anyways, you can see like as a result of him taking on this challenge, he's seen the company grow and he's excited about what that's doing and he can't wait to see it go on further. And also what's interesting here is it kind of like it leads to the next sort of beat here, which is if you want to see more, just like he is talking about doing and seeing more at this company, check out this next part of the interview. So anyways, the really important thing here, though, to note is that he has a very clear call to action here. You want to view the full interview on our Facebook page. It might be helpful, honestly, to have the Facebook page info here, or, it's probably going to be either a Facebook ad that they're running or a YouTube ad that they're running with a link in it. And so that's negligible, but I think it would be helpful. Anyway, so the important thing here, though, is that implicitly this piece communicates a very specific message. Nutray is made up of good people with a passion for food. This piece definitely feels like that. You have this guy who isn't particularly like amazing on camera. Like you wouldn't say, oh, I would want him to be the spokesperson, but he is, because he's authentic and he's himself, and Eddie did a really good job of capturing that. And then also, as far as music choice goes, I think that also communicates that it's a sort of a homegrown feel, that it's approachable and human, but inspired. And so listen to the music, at least the beginning here again.
My first job was at dishwasher at Howard Johnson's in Mystic, Connecticut in the summer of '76.
Yeah, so you get the sense that it's like hopeful and interesting, but it's also kind of like human and down to earth. It's not crazy motivational and techie sound. It just has some motion to it. So really good music choice on Eddie's part there. As we're kind of talking about music, it's a good segue into the aesthetic. There are a couple of things I noticed. You'll see some jump cuts in the A-roll. And by that I mean that you've got a cut that goes from... Here we go. Let's see. Right there. You can see it right there. I'm actually going to mute this so you can hear this a little bit better. So I'm going to go ahead frame by frame. So here... See that jump right there? Those right there you tend to want to avoid, but obviously it's unavoidable in certain scenarios. But there are a few tricks to kind of get around that. In a vlog style, it's not necessarily as important that you don't have jump cuts. For example, in this video, I'm jump cutting my own address to camera to cut out errors like the one I just made. But when you have sort of a polished piece for a brand, you tend to, unless it's part of the aesthetic and you're making a bold choice to kind of play to the vlog aesthetic or use jump cuts for some various comedic effect or narrative effect, you tend to want to steer clear of them. So let's talk a little bit about how you can beat this sort of jump cut Frankenstein monster, which can rear its ugly head in interview edits with one camera. So an easy way to do this would be to break up the edits with B-roll. So I've done a little cut here as an example. So here's the edits. There's one right there. There's a jump cut right there. And then you'll see, I'm going to mute this track. There's a jump cut right there. Then definitely a jump here. You can see that pretty drastically. So anyways, those are the ones we have to cover up, that, and that. And so one option is you can, if you have B-roll, you just throw it right over the top. So let's take a listen and a look to how this feels to us as an audience now.
Hi, I'm David Stein. I'm the executive chef for Nutray. I'm a lifer in the food service, 40 plus years in the business altogether. I've been doing this a long time.
Now I did like a hacks thing here because this right here, obviously we would want his actual video of him talking in this section, but I don't really have that because I only have the final cut. So I'm doing a little bit of insane, crazy manufacturing of clips. But the idea here is that you would take this, mute this again, he's talking, then you would cut to something relevant imagery that about something he's talking about. It's from your B-roll that you were able to capture on the day of, and then you cut back to something that brings us back to this world of the interview, which would be this shot of his hands and then him speaking again. And you can see I kind of punched in on this. I actually zoomed a little bit so you can kind of see that might help that cut a little bit better. Obviously, this is a mess because I'm using a final cut, not necessarily a raw edit. There'd be a lot of things that I might, tweak here. You can listen to what he's talking about here, and I'll tell you kind of what B-roll I would prefer over this section here.
Nutray. I'm a lifer in the food service, 40 plus years in the business altogether.
So instead of specific food shots, narratively, he's talking about how he's a lifer in the food business and he's been doing this for 40 plus years. So in this section, I actually really would have liked to have seen him specifically in the kitchen. Throughout the piece, if I go back to the original, we don't really see who it is that's performing any of these tasks in the kitchen. It would be helpful, I think, to actually see him in the kitchen, either talking to somebody or doing the work himself, but maybe that just wasn't available on the day of. That being said, if I had it, I would put it right here. I would say, as he's talking about where he's been in the kitchen, we're gonna wanna see him being in the kitchen, as opposed to what I have here, which is sort of a generic shot of food, which by the way, looks freaking delicious. My mouth is watering. You notice I did do a little bit of a punch in here by zooming the video a bit. That's another option to kind of disguise A-roll jump cuts. And you'll see that here. I'm not going to show you all of them because I mentioned there was a couple of smaller ones, and punch-ins don't work if they happen too frequently because you don't want something going like bam, 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 bam. It should feel natural to the edit. So let me show you what I did here.
A lifer in the food service, 40 plus years in the business altogether.
So that right there is an example of a punch in. And again, obviously, I don't really have enough here to kind of manipulate and massage that edit so it feels more natural. But that's the idea, that ultimately you have somebody talking and then you cut to a closer version. And I can actually even punch that a little bit more, depending on how much space you have to work with. And if you, obviously, I was trying to avoid this title here because, again, I'm working with the Final Cut. But this is sort of like a way you can disguise that. I can give you an example of a piece that I did this with where I actually only had one camera, and that is this POW Audio portable Bluetooth speakers video. So this, I took a lot of raw footage, a lot of 3D renders, and cut it together into this piece, which I will just show you the beginning of so you can kind of get a sense for how you can use punch cuts to cover up A-roll Frankensteins.
The genesis of POW Audio began as I watched my son Cameron. He's a hockey player who was looking for a way to get the boys in the locker room into the zone. The offerings were underwhelming or just too big. We discussed his dilemma and I had some thoughts. Having worked with audio companies in the past, I knew a very important ingredient: air. Cameron.
So you can see right there what I've done is I've actually done multiple kind of punch cuts in and out, and some of them are for emphasis. So anyways, you can do that with this guy as well here throughout, as I did here. Which actually looks fairly natural, assuming that I was able to get rid of this, this text. Okay, so one other option you have to cover up Frankenstein A-roll edits is what Adobe Premiere Pro calls a morph cut. Now, this is kind of tricky because the morph cut tends to not behave as you would anticipate, but it is allegedly supposed to take some frames from this clip and some frames from this clip, and when you butt them together, creating frames out of thin air that kind of match this one and this one to kind of transition it perfectly, seamlessly between the two clips. That said, it doesn't necessarily always do that, and so you'll see here when I play this back. You can see he actually kind of grew in size a bit. And it's, if you weren't looking for it, I suppose you wouldn't notice it, but it is a little funky. And so the morph cut tends to be a little bit unwieldy. In that place, honestly, it looks like his head just grew like a few sizes there. For smaller things, for more minor things, like for example, this little cut here, right here, where his head kind of just goes down by, a centimeter or so. That is where I would have used a morph cut to kind of disguise that. And that way you can get these two clips to kind of appear as one clip. And in that case, if you can get them to appear as one clip, you could even make those two clips work together as one clip, but punch it in. So you could do wide punch in for those two clips and then back out to the wide. Like I said, morph cut can be a little funky, and so you should kind of use your best judgment about whether or not it looks funky. But the best approach, really, in my opinion, is B-roll edits, because it gives you more visual information. It can actually tell the story. It can extend the story a bit, rather than kind of playing defensively and trying to avoid showing something with some punch-ins and some punch-outs or whatever, potentially even degrading footage quality in the final render because you're punching in and out. This really does say, okay, instead of showing you the same interview clip, I'm actually going to give you more visual information that could actually build on the story, like we talked about earlier, maybe showing him in the kitchen and showing him laughing with somebody in the kitchen, etc. Anyways, the music is really nice. I think that's the next aesthetic thing I was going to talk about. The only thing that I wish we could have done was have a solid hit at the end. You can see right here. It kind of just fades out abruptly. And it would have been nice to sort of have the final note in there. So a lot of times what you do is you'll take the end of a track that you really like, and you'll try to set that up where you want the piece to end. And you'll then try to figure out a way to rejigger everything to get it to ultimately fit and make it feel really cohesive, like as it was meant to be. But in this case, you don't really have that here at the end. So it's a minor piece of feedback, but I think, ultimately it's always really nice when you can have the music come to a conclusion just as you're seeing your final frame. One thing I also want to point out that Eddie did a really good job with was the color grade, and you can see it throughout. I mean, the interesting thing to me is that the primary colors are actually in this first shot. You have sort of like a teal, sort of bluish shadow, and then a warm highlight, and that's pretty consistent throughout. You see blues in the shadows, you see right over here is blue, and then sort of a nice orangey warm highlight, and then you see it here in the skin tones, like sort of an orangey nice highlight, and then blue in the shadow of his chef's outfit. What do you call this thing, by the way? Put it in the comments below, because I have no idea what it is. Moving on, you see, again, throughout this, I mean, this is a beautiful shot right here. Look at that. Like, beautiful highlights, nice shadows, got a beautiful color grade throughout. So hats off to Eddie. literally and figuratively, for a great color grade throughout this piece. The title design, on the other hand, I think could be improved a little bit. Like you see towards the end their logo, but then we kind of, I don't know, just for me, this seems like we have sort of I don't know if you can zoom in here and you can take a look at this. These are sort of angle end fonts, and there's nothing wrong with pairing a font with angles at the ends, of the letters to a font that isn't, but it does stick out if that's the only two fonts there are. So look, these are all rounded, and it would have been nice, I think, to pick a font that has rounded terminations to the letters, and also just to kind of lay this out a bit better, and then ultimately giving the link like I talked about before. I think you also could have set this off from the background a bit. You could have potentially had a shadow or a drop shadow on both of these things that made it feel like it was actually living in the space and hovering above this board that could potentially be a cutting board, although it's clearly not. I think you could have actually played it off like that by adding a blur behind this and a little bit of a drop shadow from this Nutra and the subsequent title as well. So just a couple of tips there for the title design. One aesthetic thing I noticed for the actual interview footage is that there was some eyeline variation here that can't be avoided in some cases. I had to deal with that in the piece that I shared with you earlier. The problem is that a lot of times people get distracted when they're interviewing and they look off camera or they look away to get affirmation and to see if they did a good job. And so there's only really two noticeable moments here. At about 14:10, as he's finishing up, what are you saying? And then he kind of looks off screen. So you'll see it right here. And you see it right there. It's that look up to the top right of our screen. And it can be distracting if you're really looking for it right there. And then at the end, you'll see it as well at 42:03. And this, again, is minor because, for me, I think that actually kind of captures who David is. And I wouldn't want him to feel too polished in a way, because this is a guy he's passionate about food. He's not necessarily, an on-camera personality. And I think I like that about him. So here you go. You see how he looks up right here. The way you can fix this is by cutting away earlier or bringing B-roll over the top of that. And some of that is unavoidable. Some of it you can actually tweak. And so depending on the B-roll library that you have or you've assembled on the day of, try to avoid those sort of like eyeline variations, because they do in certain situations tend to pull us out of the story. In a way, though he's not looking at the camera, not looking at us, he is looking at somebody, and that allows us to believe that we are that person and that we're listening directly to him. Whereas if he moves his eyeline off, we feel like maybe he's looking at somebody else in the room, and we all of a sudden realize, oh shoot, like maybe we're not actually in a conversation with him, which is sort of what the illusion of an interview is. You want it to feel like he's talking directly to you. A couple other little notes here. The audio itself, if I play the original here, you can hear some background noise.
My first job was at dishwasher at Howard Johnson's in Mystic, Connecticut in the summer of '76.
Now, I don't know if Eddie's tried to remove the actual audio noise in this piece, but I will say that I think it could go a little bit further, specifically on his interview track. I've done a little bit of that here. It's not going to be perfect because I've got, again, a full mixed down track, which includes both the music and his interview footage, but I'll play it back for you. You can see if it's a little bit better.
My first job was at dishwasher at Howard Johnson's in Mystic, Connecticut in the summer.
So obviously I can't really pull out too much because then we'll lose the music. But the point being that there's only really two major fixes for that. One would be you just get the room quieter, which is honestly the best, but sometimes you don't have that much control. And frankly, it sounds like they were cooking this up, no pun intended, at a kitchen. And so you have certain limitations of the environment that you just can't avoid. Second thing is to obviously run a filter over it, and you can do that with either Premiere Pro or whatever nonlinear editing program you're using. Overall, though, it's a really, really nice teaser, and hats off to you, Eddie, and to Nutre, and to David as well. You guys may be really hungry. My mouth has been watering this whole time, and I've been trying to kind of keep the drool in. But overall, beautiful shots throughout. Again, color grade, amazing. And I think overall the narrative was, spectacular. I think there's a few things we can take away from this piece. With a story like this, even though David seemed a little bit uncomfortable, that's normal on the other side of the camera. And Eddie got us to feel something about this guy's passion for food. It was authentic. And I think that's the key here. So when you're doing an interview, especially an interview that has to do with arts or craft of some kind, you have to find the passion, find the emotion, find the authentic story that lies behind the basic marketing questions. So don't just come in on a marketing video to sell a product. You should sell a person's passion. And Eddie did a really good job, I think, of that here. The second thing, again, more aesthetic, is just the eyeline of the interviewee. Make sure when you talk to somebody you're interviewing, tell them that they should just keep their eyes either directly on the camera or directly on the person who's interviewing them, and try not to break that look, especially towards the ends of sentences. The third and final thing is use B-roll to disguise Frankenstein cuts. And again, this is, dependent on the aesthetic that you're actually choosing. Are you going to go with a vlog sort of style like I have, where you're kind of just cutting this thing up like crazy? Or are you trying to shoot something that's really, really polished and you really want to immerse them in a story? If it's the latter, you really should try to use B-roll to accentuate what is being said on the A-cam, especially if the A-cam is doing something funky like a jump cut, or there's some error in the footage or whatever. Just use B-roll to extend the story. Anyway, super fun piece. Thank you to Eddie for letting me kind of go through this thing. Check out some more of his work if you got a second at the URL in the description. And if you need or want feedback on any of your edits, hit me up in the comments below with a link to your work and we'll make it happen. And I think that's pretty much it. So please subscribe up there. And if you want to see another Fix This Edit video edit review, click over there, I think. And and if you notice something I didn't, throw it in the comments below and let's fix this edit. Edit Doc out.